Hi, everybody. Welcome to the monthly manufacturing public policy overview for NTMA and PMA. My name is Paul Nathanson. I'm with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, and I'm here as always with my colleague from Inside Beltway, Omar Nashishibi. I am solo today as Caitlin is away, but we are your both advocates and public relations folks in Washington, D.C., promoting the manufacturing agenda under the banner of One Voice. So we are going to try to keep this to a half hour today, but as always, Omar has loaded a lot of content in the PowerPoint, so we'll be as efficient as possible. During the month of January coming up, you could see we're going to start off right away with a lot of things happening. We got a new administration, a new Congress coming in. Today is the vote for the speaker. A lot of high drama, which I think is just marks the first of many dramas to come coming up. We had a major announcement that we're going to get into regarding the Nippon U.S. Steel deal. And Omar's gonna go over numerous rules and regulations to keep an eye on it and what's going on with government funding. So I'm gonna turn it over to Omar to get us started.
Thanks, Paul. I just turned C-SPAN on one of my TVs. Is the 100 and there he goes, just gavelled in the 119th U.S. Congress or U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks for joining us all. Yes, Paul, we will try to keep this one back to our 30-minute time here. Let's start with the 118th Congress. That is the one that literally just concluded at 11 a.m. Eastern Time today, the 118th Congress. That covered the calendar years of 23 and 2024, and they are now finished. With them, leaving a number of unfinished items, the largest of which is government spending. Not a surprise, but Congress was unable to reach an agreement to finish all 12 spending bills prior to their departure at the end of December. They ended up passing what we call a continuing resolution, or a CR, and that CR carries them till March 14th at the current federal funding levels for fiscal year 2024. This is significant in that right now we are currently in fiscal year 25, but operating under $24. By the time we get to March 14th, we will be literally almost 6 months, halfway through the current fiscal year of 2025. And at that point, they still may not have a final bill, and rather bills, to fund the federal government. So they did at least keep the lights on and punted and gave them some more time. This was the issue, the drama, where they had an agreement, then Musk sent a tweet, then Trump had to back up Musk, and then that's how the first deal fell apart, and they ended up coming back with more or less the same deal with regards to some of the disaster relief support. For those of you that are in agribusiness, please note that the Farm Bill did not get through. That is the largest subsidization for the agri industry in the country, and that typically happens fairly regularly. They were not able to get it done. They did pass an extension with a short bridge of $10 billion. So again, those of you that are in the farm equipment supply chain, note that some of the typical purchasing cycles may be pushed off a little bit until they get the full subsidies out to the farmers for initially and then later on. A number of things that also fell out. We always knew a trade title would be very difficult at the end of the year for the Congress to wrap in, given the number of issues that were there. They did have a deal in a few areas. Ultimately, they did fall out, and that includes the China trade provisions related to the outbound investment. They had some language included in the NDAA, but nothing to the extent in the government spending. And the de minimis, I didn't think de minimis would get in. That looks like it's going to be a pay for the tax bill in reconciliation. For those in the defense industry, the National Defense Authorization Act has passed by Congress every year since 1961, and so they did yet again pass it. This does not provide direct appropriations. This is what we call a policy bill. It deals with authorizations. It tells the Congress you are allowed to provide the Pentagon up to X amount of dollars for various programs. In this instance, they left it roughly flat under the FRA rules that were implemented a couple of years ago and did not go with the additional $21 billion that the Senate had called for. They're at $895.2 billion are the defense priorities. Please note that we still need to now fund the fiscal government, the FY25 numbers for defense, which is what that previous slide was relating to as well. There were some restrictions specific to some semiconductor and some Chinese investments in telecommunications, but not as broad that was out there. One disappointment that was for those of you that are in the defense world for small businesses is on CMMC. We've been working with Congressman David Joyce, a Republican of Ohio in the Cleveland area, and there was language that his staff worked to include on the cybersecurity maturity model compliance that most of you have been dealing with now since 2017. There's new CMC 2.0 final rules that I just put out. The language in the House sought to help SME, small, mid-market economy, middle market manufacturers to comply with the CMC cybersecurity requirements. That got bounced out. Instead, there is final report language that the Senate put in. I was talking to the Senator King staff from Maine, who was working on that language starting over the summer, and his staff in December told me that they get report language, but not the full language, sensing that the Pentagon needs to do more to assist small businesses with CMC compliance, but did not go as far as the House language. So hopefully we'll have another chance to go at that in the appropriations round. That's helpful that Joyce is an appropriator and a cardinal. So I'll double back with his staffer here next week once they're settled after swearing in today. That's the latest on CMC coming from Capitol Hill. A number of lists of unfinished items coming from the 118th Congress. Again, we've got the new one that's coming. It just came in here a few minutes ago. I hate to put this out there, but this Congress, they introduced 16,203 bills, 218 became law. To put it in comparison, when Trump was around the first time in 17, they had introduced roughly 13,000 bills with 400 of them becoming law, so slightly more productive. Another area where things fell short, we had a deal on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. It's a bipartisan legislation we worked on in 2014, and that came into effect in 2015 with the rules implementation we worked on under Obama. The WIOA is the benchmark law in the entire country that deals with workforce boards, workforce developments, and all the workforce investment boards, the WIBs that are out there. We had a deal on it. There was a hold placed on it by outgoing Senator Bob Casey. Ironic, since Casey worked on the WIOA quite extensively. He wanted to get language included that would have codified the Biden administration's proposed rule that would phase out payments to those with disabilities of subminimum wage. And since he couldn't get that attached to the WIOA, he tanked the entire bipartisan bill that we've been working on. The whole town's been working on this for 3 years, at least those of us in the workforce lobbying space. So that was really, really unfortunate. Also, after the deal that was initially put together, then was killed by Musk, did include a 2-year delay of the Corporate Transparency Act beneficial ownership requirements. That got bounced out there. That 2-year legislation would have been very significant. We'll touch on that in a minute when we get into the courts that are out there. And similarly, AGOA, we knew trade was going to be tough to get in there. And then just before the end of the year, to start putting some pressure on this new Congress and the next administration, the White House, the Treasury Department, did put out their notice that the debt ceiling is about to be reached. And they said with extraordinary measures, they're going to begin doing those process. The new limit is probably going to be January 14th to the 23rd. And those extraordinary measures will likely push it off into the summer is largely what we're hearing. Ways and Means staff said it could fall anywhere between Memorial Day and August 1st. So that's what the tax staff are working their way backwards from on a debt ceiling showdown. And that was something that Trump wanted to get off on the books, and it just was too late. He put it on the table too late for Republicans to be able to take care of the debt ceiling for him. So he'll be dealing with that at some point. We are now officially, as I mentioned, in the 119th U.S. Congress that was sworn in 9 minutes ago. In that, we have a lot on their agenda, not just the unfinished items from the previous slide, but taking a look at the other issues that are coming up. Of note, last week on Wednesday, the House did pass their rule, or at least proposed their rule, rather. And they should be moving on the rule here shortly. So they are restarting the China Committee. This is the House Select Committee. It was a temporary committee created on competition between the Chinese Communist Party and the United States. And that was something very big. We worked with the committee. I reached out to Molinar, the Michigan member of Congress who's the lead on that, is the chair, and got in connection with David, his staff director, sent them a note of importance to reconstitute the committee, sent a note to the whip's office as well. So that's a good victory that the China committee is coming back together. They were appreciative of us and other outside groups that weighed in to do that as well. Hearing that we probably will start on the confirmation process, the public part of it at least next Tuesday, but a week from Tuesday, coming up on the January 14th. And I don't want to dwell too much on it now. We will get much more into this next month as we see what Senator Thune does following the swearing in of the new president, and that the reconciliation process. So I'll leave you with this. When they passed Obamacare, Democrats used the reconciliation process. They needed no Republicans. When Trump and Republicans passed the tax cuts law in 2017, they did it under reconciliation and needed no Democrats. The Republicans, right, and then most recently, the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan Act was also done that way. And there was one other, I think that Democrats did at least 2 reconciliations under Biden as well. So the Republicans are looking to do the same. In this case, though, Senate Republicans want to give Trump a win quickly, and that might be on the immigration side, and that would be very difficult for us then to make permanent a number of our tax provisions that they would want to go in that second tranche. So right now they're looking at a 2-part process, at least that's what the Senate Republicans want, to move a reconciliation bill that deals with immigration, border security, energy, and now possibly some defense issues. And then the second one would be taxes. The implications of that would be that obviously it would delay the tax bill well into the spring, likely into the summer, more likely into the fall and into the winter. And we've got a fiscal cliff coming of $4 trillion in tax increases that are coming in 1 year from 2 days ago. And that's the real challenge. And in addition, if you do this in 2 parts, sources I was on the Hill right before Christmas for a couple of weeks, and staff were very clear, and members were very clear. I was with the whip himself, and you're just going to have a smaller package. I was with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee on one of those Wednesdays too, and he said the same thing to me. He says they're just going to have more temporary provisions and less permanent on R&D, on bonus, and on those areas as well. And speaking of bonus, as I mentioned, given that we are now past January 1, for your planning purposes, your 100% expensing that was at 60% just a few days ago is now at 40%. So please factor that in for your CapEx and your planning and your expenditures. You're getting now 40% right on expensing instead of 100% unless Congress comes in at some point this year and makes you whole on that. Just a heads up, this in case it causes a blip for any processing or anything that you all are waiting on. Due to the passing of former President Carter, the federal government will be closed on January the 9th.
Yeah, Omar, I would only add, this is always a fun time in Washington in January when you have a new Congress and a new administration starts. Lots of pomp and circumstances. Today we have the speaker vote. So we'll have some drama, lots of events and folks like Omar and me trying to get in with the transition folks and communicating with them, nominations where some will sail through, others, will have some difficulty, or at least there will be some pause on them. I know Omar Bracewell's having an event on January 17th. A lot of firms are having events that I know Omar's invited to, and others who are in Washington. We always do an event with the Texas delegation and last time it was called Hats Off to Texas Energy. And this year, given the incoming administration, it's called Hats Off to U.S. Energy Dominance, where we have members of the Texas delegation over on Capitol Hill. So lots of activities and so much on the congressional agenda that they're going to have to get off and running. And we'll see what happens today as far as getting a speaker, which could also delay things if it goes more slowly than I think folks are predicting. At least I know our folks are predicting that Johnson will get through, but always now some drama about it. Thanks, Omar.
No, you're right. I appreciate that color because you are going to see quite a bit. As we said, we're not trying to criticize current President Biden, but for all intents and purposes, for the last 30, 45 days or so, most of Washington has been most of the world been treating as if Trump's already here. And in fact, he kind of is, even from Mar-a-Lago, and we're already seeing the impact of that, especially as we see what happens with the vote today. So yes, let's see how Congress reacts. We're going to have an H.R. 1 introduced that'll demonstrate what the top priority is for the incoming speaker, most likely, and possibly Johnson. And then as they get ready to move forward on the rest of their legislative priorities here. And the biggest issue they're going to have to deal with, as we've said, is funding the federal government before March 15th. And as we see Speaker Johnson right now on the floor talking to members and getting ready for vote. Let's talk about rules and regulations. I mentioned the CMMC 2.0. We will not rehash this. We did put quite a bit more in the, I believe it was our November slide deck. We had a whole section just on the cybersecurity maturity model compliance there for folks, but just did want to flag, this is now a final rule. The CMC 2.0 took effect on December 16th. So just rehashing and recycling a couple of those slides from here, just to refresh. If you want to see something more comprehensive, please do click on the link below for those compliance there as well. Reminder on the applicability of CMC 2.0 with the defense contractors that are out there that are handling controlled unclassified information, and then federal contract information are required to have either level 1, 2, or 3 on CMC compliance, regardless if you are a federal contractor. There, just a quick link on Project Spectrum, and this is the one that over at DoD that was set up specifically to help out small businesses. I referred to this on Capitol Hill, and this is the language that we had. It was a little stronger on the House side than what we ended up with from the Senate, and that's, I think, gotten some pushback from a few places. We'll figure out from Joyce how that ended up happening. As always, though, feel free to type in any questions in the question box, or if you'd like, even in the chat. But over in the Q&A side, we're happy to incorporate those into the program or answer them towards the end as well as we keep on going through the regulatory side. This one just posted the other day ahead of the holiday on from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission with regards to the Americans with Disabilities Act and wearable technology that employers might be mandating that employees use. I do know of at least one company that does provide wearable technology. That's largely because they've got an employee that is in a heat environment and often remote. But you might have instances, haven't heard very frequently, where an employer might have a trackable device that's on an employee, a wearable device, and that wearable technology. And the EEOC came out with a new fact sheet that you can click on here that says that if you're looking at electrical brain activity, you're monitoring fatigue, if you're looking at heart rate, biometric data might actually be considered a medical examination as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. If the wearables require employees to provide health information, including the setting up of the device. So if you're putting in your weight, your age, many things that a lot of us have already done on our iWatches, those are things to be considered in terms of any potential exposure that you might out there. Again, not hearing that it's very frequent as of now, but increasingly it might be over time as employers look at different ways to communicate and track, and even if it's in for the safety of the employees there as well. Shifting over to the National Labor Relations Board, they came out with a decision on December the 10th that said that the employer must enter into a collective bargaining action with a union before they make significant changes to their operations that are out there. And that is a clear and unmistakable waiver standard that they are reinstating that's out there. And what they're saying is that the contract coverage test made it easier for employers to avoid to engage in collective bargaining when they've changed the working conditions of union represented employees without first providing a notice that's there. A few areas to also take a look at and something to watch closely is, in addition to the NLRB, we do now have our portal open for the 300A. And the 300A, this goes back to the Obama eras. We've talked about this, the e-filing for the certain entities that have 20 to 249 employees. In one of our industries, your 333 and 332 NAICS, you're listed. And then the 250 or more, it doesn't matter, 20 or more for all of you. If you have those number of employees, then you are required to file the 300As, and the portal just opened yesterday on January the 2nd. Please be aware of that and don't wait till the last minute in case the portal crashes. A few things came out. One thing came out from the Department of Homeland Security with regards to employment authorization. Again, probably doesn't affect too many members that are out there, too many attendees, but this does deal with certain employment authorization document renewal processes, and it increases from 180 to 540 days. They went through a couple of temporary rules on this. The final rule takes effect January 13th. So if you do have any work permit folks that are subject to this extension, this is a notification to speak with your counsel on and seeing how it applies to your workforce and your workplace there as well. A couple things on EPA here, and we're going to continue to see this, and this is a warning. just because you're going to have a Republican coming in, and certainly because it's Trump, you might expect more on regulatory relief. When it comes to PFAS and the forever chemicals, much of this is dictated not only by the courts, but by the U.S. Congress. The Congress has put in statute in the defense law that the U.S. government must put out certain rules, regulations, and collect information from industry, even going back to 2011. And those reportings are going to be start doing next year. So Trump's kind of hamstrung in what he can and can't do in some instances, and then the courts will step in and because a lot of lawsuits have been filed at the local levels and state levels to move this forward. So just a heads up on this, the new study that deals with PFAS data collection, and it does cover some manufacturing categories that will include some of our members as well in there to watch out for. This one we did give a warning about last month and have plenty of time before that, going back to the Obama era. Might even been W. Bush on the case of TCE. But trichloroethylene, TCE, that is officially going to be banned. You've got about a year. There are some exemptions, exclusions for that allow for a little bit longer, but for the vast majority are going to be eliminated within 1 year. That's going to be for some of the products that are due. If you are still using TCE, which again, we've been talking to you all about this since 08, 09, and we warned you to start looking for an alternative. You should be very, very quickly talk to your customers and your suppliers about what you can be doing to find an alternative for TCE. Not as common as the PCE, the tetrachloroethylene, and that one still is on PCE, but tetrachloroethylene is his more common name. That one is more commonly referred to in dry cleaning, but we did see some degreasing uses as well that might affect some of your NAICS codes of 332 and 333. So folks for PCE and TCE, watch those closely. If there might be a handful of members that are on here that are in the plastics world and rubber, there was a couple of them that are going in on some of the resins and the polymers and some of the others that go in there. I don't think it was TPE. Again, the EPA just did something similar for those. So if you are working in the plastics in the rubber industry, please make sure you either reach out to us or whomever on the EPA side banning some of those inputs as well there. Last couple items here on EPA related. California did get an extension of its waiver ahead of Trump coming into office. That is not a surprise there. And where they're dealing with both on the passenger vehicles and then on the heavy duty as well, and off-road vehicles and engines, and this is dealing with their emissions. California, since the 70s, has had its own waiver, and that keeps getting extended and then gets battled with lawsuits. This is something that's important. I know the Bracewell folks work closely on this, follow it closely as we know that the Trump administration is going to come in and try to block California from allowing itself to set the standard for the entire United States marketplace through that exemption that it's got there as well. Also in California, Prop 65. We talked about this, it might have been 2 years ago or three, I think 21 or 22. It's still during most of the tail end of pandemic. California has a Prop 65 that's out there. We did a webinar on this a couple of years ago as well. I just want to put out there for those of you that are subject to Prop 65, by now you know what this means, but they do have a new short form warning. The vast majority of you that are covered under a Prop 65 because you are shipping out into California, or even if you're not shipping to California, a resident or a employee in the state of California can go onto your website and look at a catalog and potentially purchase through the website. You are required to put a Prop 65 disclaimer. If you are at a show and you are putting out a tabletop or you are at one of the booths, you have to have a Prop 65 disclaimer in most instances. So this is a new short form warning that's come up there. So notice that it's a little bit more tailored in some cases. But again, if you know what a short form versus long form Prop 65 warning is, get the slide to the person in your shop that handles that, please. A couple other things and we'll wrap up here on some of the regulatory issues in a few slides and head into more on the trade and some of the Bracewell issues. We've been going back and forth all of November and December on this one, and this is the Corporate Transparency Act, known as Beneficial Ownership Requirement Information. Going a number of years ago, in December of 2020, the Congress included the defense bill that Trump vetoed, and they overrode his veto in January of 2021 before Biden came into office on the Corporate Transparency Act. This goes back many years in the making. It's about money laundering, and it requires by law that small businesses with 20 or fewer employees and 5 million or less in gross receipts or sales have to file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, all the beneficial ownership network, including photocopies of their license or other government issued ID, their home addresses, contact information, and all of that for any establishment that was in existence prior to 2024 would have had to file by December 31, 2024, were it court not have jumped in. So courts went back and forth. One put an injunction, another one stepped in and overrode that, then came back with a panel that is going to review it. Short of it, if you did not file, you are not in violation. Between now and March 25th, there might be a reversal, but there's a panel that's going to be hearing whether or not Congress exceeded its authority towards the federal government through Interstate Commerce Clause by mandating this. Note, all of you that own a business or have created one, you know you have to file something with the Secretary of State. So this information is already out there. The federal government just now wants it for itself so it can sift through it and then ultimately get leaked and hacked into. So that'll go back and forth. I'm going to be smart aleck on it, but we'll see where we end up. But again, look forward to the next steps coming in for March 24th there for the next step on that one. Also, keep in mind, though, if you did create a company in 2024 and you were subject to that 90 days requirement even prior to, you theoretically should have put that in and done your filing. And so keep that in mind. And similar for those of the 2025, if it goes back into effect, you've only got a 30-day period to file with FinCEN on your federal documents there. On the IRS, a couple of things here quickly. Research and development credit form. We talked about this in September. There was a draft form that we put in one of our slides earlier this year, earlier last year rather, with regards to changes that the IRS was considering on their research and development tax credit form. This is the updated now that they're looking for the 2025 year. They're seeking some input. So if you are hearing of potential changes and additional requirements for you smaller businesses that your CPA comes to you for, this is where it's coming from. They're saying qualified small business taxpayers that check the box that claim a reduced payroll tax credit, or that taxpayers with the total qualified research expenses equal or less than $1.5 million, and then have less than 50 million in gross receipts, you'd be subject to filling out Section G on business component detail and statistical sampling. So additional work for you all to do, making it harder to invest in the U.S. We'll see if this one stands the test of time, but just a heads up, and don't be surprised if you do end up hearing from your tax practitioner on that one as well. Speaking of your tax practitioner, this is more of just the FYI, and throw this into whoever handles your mileage reimbursement rates for using personal or is calculating the depreciation or whatever you're doing on the passenger or on your vehicles that are used for company purposes. We've got a new mileage number up there. Paul, that's it on the regulatory side. Let's shift over, if we could, here on what's going on with trade, tariffs, supply chains. All of you woke up to much of the same news if you're in the steel world.
Yeah, let's start with some to level set U.S. steel prices versus the rest of the world. This is the latest one. Actually, this reports to December 23rd, and you can see, as usual, U.S. prices are higher than the rest of the world. That the lighter blue arrow with the line down there is China prices, which I know that most of the folks on this call are always concerned with steel prices, but equally or more concerned with what your competitors overseas are paying. So with that context, we woke up to the news, or it was reported, leaked last night, that President Biden had decided to block the Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel purchase. So whatever your personal position is, it does going to create some issues. So this has been long expected since when the deal was first announced in March. President Biden issued he commented that he was opposed to it, which undercut the process, the CFIUS process, as they call it, which is supposed to be a nonpartisan, multi-department review of any foreign purchase to ensure that it doesn't threaten national security. I think his comments in March opened up this blockage of the deal to litigation, which both Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel have threatened to do. Basically, President Biden blocked the deal despite some push by some advisors that he reconsider, and Nippon had all these offers on the table about ensuring that the U.S. government basically would have to approve any cut in production. They've made all these concessions, but I think the deal was doomed because the U.S. steelworkers were opposed to it, and this administration obviously is very close to unions, particularly the steelworkers union, and that was going to doom it. And also, the incoming administration has not been any more enthusiastic about this deal. So, assuming that this deal is dead, which it looks like, then you will have probably one other U.S. purchaser who's in a position to buy U.S. steel, and that's Cleveland-Cliffs. Obviously the concern for those who consume steel is that less competition results in higher prices, maybe less steel supply. So we're going to have to see how that all plays out. But I think, Omar, most of us in Washington could have predicted this end result back in March, and just seeing the process play out. And the other thing that is going to be interesting to look at is how this impacts Japan-U.S. relations, given that we have said now that a Japanese-owned U.S. steel company would threaten U.S. national security.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a test case. And Paul, you and I could teach a class on how not to run a campaign based on the way they messed this up on the Steel Nippon deal, going top down instead of bottom up, and whole lot of issues from there. And so, no, it doesn't look like Trump's going to allow that one to go through. And you can see the language here in the order that was put out from the White House just this morning, a few hours ago, saying it is prohibited at even going any other subsidiary. So they're putting a total nail in that coffin, the way that this language that was put out this morning in those two provisions that you saw right there as well. U.S. Trade Representative, a couple quick action items here as we get ready to wrap up. As always, please feel free to type in any questions you've got in the question and answer box. We'll go ahead and answer those in about 3 or 4 slides here. USTR is initiating what we call a Section 332 investigation into the impact of trade and policy on the smallest of companies, which are going to be all of you all, basically under 5,000 employees or so on the mid-size, even under 1,750 on the small size, and the micros tend to be single digits, 20 or so under there. And to take a look at, this is an investigation process. We'll probably file some comments on it, but just to put out just an awareness in case the U.S. International Trade Commission is sending out surveys, which they likely will in the coming months, into the impacts. And this is one of those that we could see potentially the Trump administration keeping most of it, except for they do go into here about identity, orientation, age, disability, incomes. Those are the things that Trump is not going to want to continue with, obviously, there as well. USTR did initiate 2 actions under Section 301. Section 301 is what the Trump administration used starting in 2018 to impose tariffs on China. And in this instance, the Biden administration is launching a Section 301 action on semiconductors. This might sound redundant, but this would add to any other tariffs that are already in place. And knowing that there's a couple of parts that were in here. We only included one relevant area of evidence indicates that in just 6 years, China has nearly doubled its global share of foundational logic semiconductor production capacity, and then announced new fab plans. China's share is projected to reach approximately half the world's capacity by 2029. Now, this is one of those areas we do anticipate the Trump administration to continue there as well. Under the existing Section 301s that Trump put in place and that the Biden folks started to increase in September of this year, this is related to tungsten. We now are going to have a 25 and a 50% tariff, depending on its form and function there as well, coming in from China. That was just done as well. Lastly, here, as we get ready to wrap, we do see that the White House did release its first quadrennial supply chain review. This is something we actually worked on legislation that would create this a number of years ago. And so we are started going through it, but there are some significant things in there, some points that were in, but when you go through their 4 main findings, nothing should really stand out. They do highlight a few industries as well that are of industry, of vulnerability and of interest to the administration. Looking forward to it. Now, we mentioned this about a year ago, might have been in 2023. The Energy Department has for 40 years, I think since the 1970s, put out different grants to manufacturers, some industry training assessment center implementation grant program. They just most recent round, what we call round 5, came out with 57 individual small and medium-sized manufacturers across the U.S. were receiving funding for energy and efficiency projects. I mean, these range in, 20, 30 grand, 50 grand, 100, 200,000. So they can vary going up to 300,000 per project. They can cover LEDs, process optimization, HVACs, on-site power, installation of variable frequency drives, power factor upgrades, but also a heavy machine upgrades as well. Something to take a look into if this is of interest. These are live links that you can click here to register for the January 7th office hours that the Department of Energy will be holding if you're interested in learning more about opportunities and how it may or may not be a good fit for you. Lastly, you just want to throw in here on the ISM's gauge on factory activity on the PMI. We see kind of balancing out a little bit. We'll see what ends up happening after the inauguration. A slight uptick, still going below reading, means on contraction. Obviously, we're seeing what's happening in Germany and the rest of the world. As always, we can get a little bit more color commentary from us. You're going to have a whole lot to hear about. Depends on what happens with the speaker vote here coming up today on our podcast that we do every 2 weeks or so on the Talking with One Voice, which you can download on any one of your podcast apps. And we look forward to recording one and launching one here likely in the next week or so. As always, please feel free to donate and do so. In fact, support your PMA and your NTMA and your advocacy programs that make this podcast and webinar available and possible. Thank you as always. Try to keep it to a little bit closer to the 30-minute mark. We came close. Any questions, anything we could expand upon here? Obviously, in our next one coming up at the end of the month, we'll get more into, with Trump coming in, you can expect a flood of executive orders starting on day one, along with starting the regulatory process, and we will touch on those along with what the Congress ends up deciding on the 1 or 2 reconciliation process pathway there as well. Again, feel free to type. We'll stick around here for another 20, 30 seconds, see if anyone types any questions in. And then, as always, feel free to reach out to any one of us or your team over at NTMA and Jenny or at PMA and Christy, and we're happy to get you taken care of. Seeing no questions come in, thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to speaking to you in about 4 weeks or so towards the end of the month. Thank you much.